What's up, everybody? Decided I'm going to do one more video here. I'm getting ready to go to sleep, but I just watched a video about another plan by Newsome in California. Ironically, it's a plan that I actually support, but I don't support people like Pelosi, Newsome, McConnell, or any of these politicians that want to leave us locked in this crony capitalist society that we live in. Yes, kids, I know you're all told we live in a free market society. We do not live in a free market society. We are over-regulated to be a free market society. We are improperly taxed to be a free market society. And we allow big corporations to write laws to extinguish competition, which would not happen in a free market society. We do not live in a free market society. We live in a crony capitalist society. We actually live in a quasi-fascist capitalist society. If you really don't understand what fascist capitalism is, you need to study Nazi Germany, and even what's his name there from Italy, Mussolini's fascist capitalist society. We do not live in a free market, though. Anybody who tells you America is currently a free market system, they either don't know what they're talking about or they're lying to you. I think most people just don't know what they're talking about, but there's a lot of people that are saying we live in a free market society, and they're saying it to you with a straight face, and they are absolutely lying to you. They are not telling you the truth. But anyway, what Newsom wants to do is he wants to implement a state UBI. I support the idea of a UBI. It shouldn't be a state UBI, though. It should be done on a federal level. It should be set up where anybody who's currently on welfare, if you're working, you can automatically switch over to UBI. If you're on welfare and you want to get the UBI, you have to get a job, then you can switch over to UBI, because the UBI will be set up to roll back welfare rolls over time to eliminate welfare, because welfare is a trap meant to keep people in poverty. The way welfare is set up, it is set up intentionally to keep people governmentally dependent. For example, what's the poverty line? Is it $12,000, $13,000, something like that? The way welfare is set up, you go out and you get a job, and instead of setting at the poverty line, let's say the poverty line is $13,000. Instead of setting up where your welfare starts rolling back dollar for dollar at maybe $18,000 then, or $19,000, or even $20,000, take your pick, whatever everybody agrees on. Instead of rolling back for every dollar you make over that point, dollar for dollar, once you start working, they throw you underneath the bus to punish you for getting a job and trying to get out of the welfare system. So my idea with UBI would be, let's say, again, it's the $13,000 is the poverty mark. You get $1,000 a month for UBI. That would mean at $25,000, your UBI starts rolling back dollar for dollar every dollar you make over UBI. So if one year you make $26,000, you lose $1,000 a UBI the next year. And it lets you climb up the economic ladder. It doesn't throw you underneath the bus. It lets you climb out of poverty. And it lets you escape the government dependence trap. Unfortunately, because of those things, to begin with, crony capitalists who want to keep everybody in poverty, especially progressives, they don't want that happening. They're not going to be happy with that. Another thing that happens is because people don't want to live in poverty. People want to climb out. And $1,000 a month is a nice, stable safety net. Maybe they can even set it up where if you're someone who is working and your company goes out of business, they can set it up where you get an extra $1,000 a month for UBI, and you still got to go through the same process as you would if you were on unemployment. But then you're getting the $2,000 a month till you get back to work, and it goes back to the $1,000 a month. And as soon as you hit that point over that mark again, it's the dollar for dollar rollback, and it lets people climb up the economic ladder. Another thing that would have to be done, though, which progressives will completely hate, ironically, Republicans will hate it too, but we need to get rid of all these subsidies and tax loopholes. Because that's how you fund the UBI. You get rid of all these tax subsidies and loopholes. The advantage to this, though, is by creating wealth and allowing people to climb out of poverty, you're actually creating a future tax base. As more and more people get into that point where they can pay taxes, and you get more and more people paying those taxes, you can actually roll back the tax rate. Progressives are going to hate that idea. That's why I don't want progressives setting up UBI, and I don't want any crony capitalists setting up UBI. Most of the people we have in Washington, D.C. right now cannot be trusted to set up UBI. There is no way I will ever get behind a UBI plan if it's rolled out by Biden and Harris, or if it's rolled out by someone like Mitch McConnell and Ted Cruz, because they can't be trusted. Because they all support crony capitalism, for one, and on the other side, they support government dependency. So there's very few people in Washington right now we can trust to roll out a UBI plan that would be worth even thinking about getting behind. But with the right people, like Yang, I would get behind the UBI plan with Yang, because Yang understands capitalism. Yang understands what a free market is. Yang understands how a free market is supposed to operate. So if someone like Andrew Yang was the one rolling this plan out in the government, I would get behind it. The biggest problem with UBI for everybody in our government right now is, like I said, once it starts creating that tax base, where you're creating a tax base that you're bringing in so much more taxes that you can start rolling back tax rates, all these crony capitalists and all these progressives are not going to like that. But unfortunately, their voices aren't going to matter much once you start creating that tax base, because when people lift out of poverty, they become fiscally conservative. And when they become fiscally conservative, they become aware of what the government is doing with their money. And so you'll have people that at one time were screaming for tax hikes that are now screaming for tax reductions. One of the other things that would have to be done is we would have to get rid of this whole divide in what is investing when it comes to taxes. Because whether you're taxing wealth or you're taxing your health, aka labor, it should be all taxed at the same rate at income. The only exception to that should be a retirement fund. I would say a retirement fund should probably be tax-free up to the first $1 million. After $1 million, the taxes should be the same as if you were employed or investing, whatever that rate will be, because both should be taxed at the same rate at a minimum. I would actually argue that investing your labor is actually a greater risk, because when you investing your money and something goes wrong and it gets lost, you can make the money back. When you're investing your labor and something goes wrong, a lot of times you can't get your labor back. Especially, if it's something that actually is your labor itself, like a physical injury. But so actually investing your labor is a greater risk than investing money. So I've never understood why I can have a stock portfolio, but it's taxed at a lower rate than if I'm actually putting my actual health on the line. But at a minimum, they should be taxed the same. They're both investments. When you go to work for somebody, you're investing in that company. Because a company can, without people investing labor, a company can't grow any bigger than the person who's building the company. A person who's building the company is only humanly capable of building so many widgets. He has to get labor to increase the number of widgets that can be built. That's an investment. It's a mutual investment, but it's still an investment. But anyway, back to the retirement plan. It should be tax-free. If you're going to put your money in a 401k, IRA, anything like that, up to $1 million tax-free. From $1 million to $5 million, it should be a reduced tax. Anything over $5 million, taxed at the same exact rate as if you were earning an income. I think I said that wrong earlier. I think I didn't completely explain that right the first time I said that. So, tax-free up to $1 million, reduced tax from $1 million to $5 million, and then the same as if you were actually earning an income, anything over $5 million. It's a fair retirement plan. And we get rid of all these loopholes, all these tax write-offs, all these subsidies. You get rid of all that junk, because that also translates into being able to reduce tax rates later on down the line. Actually, you'd be able to, by getting rid of all that stuff, you'd be able to reduce tax rates even sooner, because you're already increasing your tax revenue. And so since you're already increasing your tax revenue, you can start reducing tax rates. But without all these things happening, the UBI cannot work. Because the UBI is meant to lift people out of poverty. The UBI is meant to be that bridging to help people get up that ladder. That UBI is meant to, down the line, finally be able to get rid of welfare completely. That UBI is meant to, with the exception of that one protection for unemployment, when you're working for somebody and that unemployment and that employment goes away, with the exception of that one protection, in general, unemployment insurance goes away. For, like, if they implemented the UBI next year, the right people implemented UBI next year with that kind of a plan, for people my age and younger, Social Security, by the time we're ready to retire, Social Security would go away for us. It would still be there for the people that paid into the Social Security system that are older than me and be collecting Social Security, like my parents, for example, and people, maybe 10 years younger than my parents, but 10 years older than me. They'll still be collecting Social Security. But the rest of us, from that point down, the Social Security really wouldn't be needed by us anymore. So eventually it does away with all these different programs, and it starts doing away with all that budget money going into the government and all that extra bureaucracy that's being paid in the government, and it starts reducing the cost of government. So, if UBI was implemented the right way, it can work. But like I said, the crony capitalists and progressives, they will not like that at all. They don't like that idea at all. Especially crony capitalists on the other side, because one of the other things that would have to be addressed is the weaponized regulation to eliminate the growth of small business. We need common sense regulation. Government's a necessary evil, so we obviously need common sense regulation. But right now we have so much weaponized regulation designed by these corporations to make sure that people can't compete with them, that you can't start a business today. Bernie Sanders likes to talk about the Netherlands all the time. The Netherlands is a capitalist society. Yeah, you pay higher taxes, but it's also easier to start a business. Anybody can start a business in the Netherlands because it's so easy, because of the soft regulations in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is not exactly a cesspool of pollution. The Netherlands is not a cesspool where people are dumping batteries in the rivers and all that kind of crap. The reason that the tax rate is as high as it is in the Netherlands is, one, because of their free college and the socialized medicine. When it comes to the free college, that's something I actually would get behind too. That would be something worthwhile to have there with the UBI, if it was done in a way where you're using an ASVAB form test like they do in the military to test your skills. And if you want to go to college for free, you can take in college what that ASVAB says you're qualified to do in college. If the ASVAB says you're qualified as someone to go out and mow lawns, but you want to go to college to be a lawyer, you can pay to go to college to be a lawyer. You can't get a free college education to go to school to be a lawyer. And another thing, unlike the Netherlands, to go to college once. That's the problem with the Netherlands, with their college system. People are allowed to just continually keep taking college courses and college courses and college courses, and they're gaming the system. We can't allow that. First of all, the country is too big to be able to afford to do something like that. And second of all, it's just an abuse of the system. That's not, and it creates a failure of the system. which is what progressives would get behind, because progressives want to keep people in poverty. They need people to stay dependent on the government, because when people aren't dependent on the government, progressives have no power. Outside of the fact that, we have so many laws that progressives make because of all the stupid people. Stupid people actually are one of the big problems with keeping progressives in power. That's why we got so many laws on the book. But there are things we can do to invest in the future of this country, and we can improve the future of this country, but they're going to go against everything progressives want and everything crony capitalists want, and they will do everything they can to sabotage the system. It's kind of like when Bill Clinton passed that fair housing plan to make it easier for people to get into buying a home. You know what the problem with that system was? You weren't allowed to go in and buy a home you could afford. That's why that system failed. And that was forced to be in there by crony capitalists. Unfortunately, at that time, most of those crony capitalists were on the side of the Republicans, but they forced that to be in there. So even though there were houses out there for, you could go out and find houses for, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, if you wanted to go into the programs that the government set up, you weren't allowed to buy those houses. You had to buy a new construction. And because you had to go buy a new construction, you weren't allowed to buy a house that you knew you could afford. So you had to, even though you knew the realtors were conning you, telling you you could afford this house, and in the back of your mind you knew you couldn't, because you wanted to buy a house, a lot of people let the realtors con them into buying these houses. But that was a fundamental failure on part of that program put in there by crony capitalists, because crony capitalists didn't want people going out buying homes they could afford, nor did the progressives want people going out buying homes they could afford. Each of them had their own agendas for why they wanted that. On the crony capitalist side, they wanted that happening because they knew when people went in and tried buying these houses and then they lost these houses, that them and their buddies would all be able to go in and buy these houses for pennies on the dollars. And the progressives knew that when people lost these houses and they fell back into that loss of hope and loss of accomplishment, that, with that comes the depression, and with that comes the decline, and with that comes the lack of motivation to succeed, and slowly people start falling back into that welfare trap. So each of them had their own agenda for why they wanted that rule in there, but they all supported that rule for their own agendas. They were two very different agendas, but it was supported by both sides for their agendas. And that's my biggest fear with the UBI, because you're going to have people with their own agendas, and on both sides of that agenda, they're going to want the system to fail for different reasons. Crony capitalists for one reason, and progressives for the other reasons. So right now, with most of the people that are in Washington, we can't hope to get the UBI, to get a functioning UBI system in place. We get the right people in there, people like Andrew Yang, and people with that kind of mindset that understand how the free market is supposed to work and they understand all the problems with our crony capitalist society that we live in today, because we do live in a crony capitalist society. We do not live in a free market society. That is a lie. And when people are telling you that, they are lying to you, or they just don't understand. But we do not live in a free market in America today. This is not a free market system. Our system is not set up at all to succeed the way a free market system would allow it to succeed. So that's why I get behind the idea of a UBI. But I also believe it needs to be strenuously implemented. And it needs to be implemented with the goal of success. And so, like I said, that means we need to set up a retirement tax plan. So we need all kinds of tax overhauls. We need a retirement tax plan put in place. We need a tax plan that will tax whether I'm investing my money in the stock market or I'm investing my money in labor, that my income tax will be the same. We need a regulation overhaul to de-weaponize regulations right now that is stifling business growth, especially for small business. Corporations can absorb that cost, and established businesses can absorb that cost. But new businesses, it's just been designed to stifle new business growth. And that's been done intentionally. So that needs to be overhauled. And possibly, if we went with a Netherlands-style college program, we need it where you take that ASVAB test. Whatever the courses are you qualify for, those are the courses you're allowed to pick from. But if you want to take, like I said, if you qualify to be somebody who cuts grass, a lawn manicurist, engineer, but you want to be a lawyer, you can pay to be a lawyer. Another thing is, the government has to tell colleges, this is what we're going to pay. And it has to be a fair rate, but it's definitely got to be lower than what college rates currently are. But it's also at the same time got to be a fair rate. Teachers need to make an honest living. But there's no need for it to be at the cost that it is today. And by the government saying this is what we're going to pay, then for those people that want to pay for college to take the courses that they're not qualified for because they feel they can do that, then that's where the free market comes into play, and colleges got to compete for them dollars. And that drives down the cost of college. And when it drives down the cost of college, it also drives down the cost of college for the taxpayers. So that would wind up being a win-win for everybody in the end too. And it can't be like the Netherlands where you can just keep perpetually staying in college for the rest of your life. You get to take, if it's going to be, if you're qualifying for technical school, 1 year, 2 years, that's what it pays for. If you qualify for courses in college where it's a bachelor degree or a doctorate degree or a PhD, if you qualify for those different levels of college, those are the college levels that will be paid for. because our country is supposed to be set up in a free market system, which means everybody's supposed to be on a level playing field. Right now, we do not live in a level playing field. That's because of all the crony capitalism. That's the biggest issue. We do not live on a level playing field. We live in a society with a rigged system that is designed for failure. It's designed for failure by both sides for different motivations. It's designed for failure by the crony capitalists because they don't want people competing with their businesses, especially corporations. And it's designed for failure by the progressives because progressives need to keep people in poverty to keep them dependent on the government. When people rise up out of poverty, they become fiscally responsible. And when they become fiscally responsible, they become fiscally conservative. And when they become fiscally conservative, they tend to pay attention to what the government is doing with their taxes. And that's not good for progressives. So both sides have their own agenda to why they have rigged the system to fail. But both sides have rigged the system to fail. And both sides have fixed the deck to make sure that it is as difficult and unlikely as possible for you to rise out of poverty.